What's up, guys? It's Murphy's Philosophy here again. I was doing some dry fire practice and decided, you know what, I'm going to talk a little bit about trigger control and pressing triggers and how to shoot accurately and all that. I'm hopefully going to keep this video kind of short. So, in the old days, everyone was kind of taught that trigger control was everything. Like if you don't have trigger control, you're not going to hit the target. That's the number one thing you need to master is how to press a trigger. And that mentality has it's kind of been shown to be not exactly accurate. I'm going to say that. There's some other things that go into accurate shooting. Specifically, we're talking about handguns here. And so, what is it? What's the deal on trigger control? Some people say that it's really not important at all. Some people say it's massively important. Some people are kind of in the middle. So what's the deal? What's the deal on it? So, in talking about trigger control and how you miss, most people, when they miss, they shoot low left if they're right-handed, and they'll shoot low right when they're left-handed. And back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, this was said, trigger control. Oh, it's trigger control. You're jerking the trigger. That's what you're doing. You're jerking the trigger. Well, that's actually not true. It's actually not correct. You're not jerking the trigger, and that's not making you shoot low left. Okay, it's recoil anticipation. So basically, what happens, and these guns all have dummy rounds in them, by the way. Basically, what happens is when you pull the trigger, right? If you're right-handed, you pull the gun down because the gun's fixing to go off. And being a human being, you're real smart, and you know the gun's fixing to go off. And so what you do is you push the gun down to compensate for the recoil of the pistol. And that's why it's called recoil compensation or anticipating of recoil, something like that. Because that's what you're doing. You're actually pressing the gun down like that while you're pulling the trigger in hopes of timing it perfectly to where you push the gun and the gun goes off at the same time, and that way you can compensate for the recoil that you know is coming as soon as that trigger breaks. This has absolutely nothing to do with pulling the trigger. Okay, it's not your trigger finger that's pulling the gun off of alignment, it's you. You're doing it intentionally. And this is a very hard habit to break. I would say that this is the main problem that every single shooter has to wrestle with is anticipation of recoil. That's the number one thing you're trying to train out of yourself. That's the number one thing you're fighting when you're shooting. And it's never really going to go away. You're always going to be battling this issue. Because you're a human being. You know when you pull the trigger, the gun's going to go off and it's going to recoil, and you know this is coming, and so you want to compensate for that. So the way that you do it is basically you just have to kind of tell yourself when you're shooting, hold the gun still. And this leads to an issue with the old school way of shooting a handgun. We used to teach that you need to focus on the trigger, right? I'm sure all of you have heard focus on the trigger, focus on the trigger, focus on the trigger. Everyone used to be told that crap. You look at the front sight and focus on the trigger, right? Well, this is actually counterproductive. And the reason that it's counterproductive is because if you're focusing on the trigger, meaning that you are attending to the trigger, you are mentally focusing on the trigger. Okay, that's where your attention is. That means that your sense of when the gun is going to go off and when it's going to recoil up is going to be heightened, which means you're going to be hyper aware of when that gun goes off and when that gun's going to recoil. And this leads a lot of times to anticipation, okay? Because remember, anticipation is a mental problem. It's not a physical problem, okay? So focusing on the trigger really, from a psychological standpoint, is really counterproductive. What you should instead be focusing on, what you should be attending to, is holding the gun still. And that's what you need to be telling yourself. So with this double action, single action pistol, this is a HKP 30L, what I need to be telling myself is, hold the gun still, hold the gun still, hold the gun still. Hold the sights on target and hold the gun still while I'm pressing the trigger. The whole time I should be focusing on holding the gun still while I cycle this trigger. Okay? And that's the whole goal of shooting. It's holding the gun still while you are manipulating the trigger. Okay? Now, holding the gun still has nothing to do with the trigger pull. Okay? That's your hands and your arms and your stance. That's what does that. And so that kind of leads to the issue of this focus on the trigger kind of attitude. And, oh, you need to pull the trigger straight back and all this other kind of stuff to get an accurate shot. Now, I don't believe that trigger control is irrelevant. Don't misunderstand. So I'm not in that camp, but I'm also not in the camp of the trigger is the only thing, right? From what I've seen, it's both. Really, what you're trying to do here is your grip, right? The grip is the most important thing in my opinion. And grip is not just how you hold the gun, okay? The grip doesn't stop at your hands. The grip is your arms, your shoulders, the whole upper part of your body is part of your grip. It's not just your hands, okay? So when I say grip's the most important thing, if your grip is correct on the gun, and the gun should present out to the target straight in front of you like this, there should be no left or right shots if your grip is good. Okay, your grip and the way you present the gun, locking your arms out, getting the triangle of power and all that, that should center that gun straight up to the target. And so left and right shots should be gone. At that point, the only thing you're looking at is up-down, right? It's up-down shots. So that's where your sights come into play. So I look at it this way. I think that trigger control and grip are on a scale. They're on a sliding scale, okay? The better your grip is, the less trigger control matters. The worse your grip is, the more trigger control matters. Think of it this way. What's stronger? This one finger or these two hands? What can exert more pressure and more force? Well, obviously the answer is my two hands are far stronger than this one finger. Okay? So if I have a good solid grip with both of these hands on this pistol, how in the world can this finger, this one little finger, move this gun around? The answer is it really can't. At least not to any kind of large degree. Okay? I'll get into a topic of distance shooting versus close-up shooting in another video with handguns, but it is different. Okay? The way you shoot at 25 yards is not going to be the same as you shoot at 5 yards. But this finger can't move this gun off to any meaningful way. Okay? The amount of force that this finger can exert on this handgun when I have two strong hands locking this gun into position like a vise is very, very, very minimal. And so the worse my grip is, the more my finger is going to be able to maneuver this gun around. the better my grip is, the less this finger is going to be able to move this gun around. So that's the way I look at it. It's a sliding scale, okay? And I've done this in the past. I've taught students, many students, and I did a little experiment on this to try to figure this out. So during one course, I only gave students instruction on grip and stance. That's it. I never mentioned sight alignment. I never mentioned trigger, nothing. I only corrected their grip and their stance. That's it. This is many years ago, by the way. What happened was I had shooters that went from shooting a 60, in the 60s, 65, 66, whatever, on a qualification, to people who were shooting high 80s and 90s on qualifications. And the only thing I fixed was their grip and stance. Okay? So by improving the grip, their scores skyrocketed. Their split times decreased. Their accuracy greatly increased. Everything got better. And I never mentioned trigger control or sight alignment. The reason I didn't mention sight alignment is because sight alignment takes care of itself. Sight alignment's really not a big thing. I've never known a person who couldn't align sights because, again, we're human beings, right? We have a post here and a notch here. We know to put the post inside the notch, and we know to square it up. We square it up, equal daylight and equal across the top, because we're humans. Like, we like having things symmetrical. We like having things that are the same. And if something is not the same, you can immediately pick it out. Every human being can do this. You can look at something and you can say, that's different. That's out of whack, right? So aligning the sights, that's not a problem. Unless they have some type of eye issue, that's really not an issue. So I didn't mention sights, didn't mention trigger. Only grip and stance. And all the shooters across the board, the entire class, got much better. Even the shooters that were really poor excelled. Okay? So this focus on the trigger, and precise in my words here, focus on the trigger, psychologically is probably not a very good idea because you're putting the focus, you're putting your mental acuity onto this when it should be on this, on holding the gun still until the gun goes off. Because if you hold the gun still until the gun goes off, the round is going to go right where the sights are pointing. If you start doing crazy stuff, then that's when you miss. So on trigger press, trigger control, and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of the way I see it. And I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years on teaching this way. And so no, I'm not a trigger doesn't matter guy. I think it does matter, okay? Especially when you get back to farther distances. But I think that it's a sliding scale, okay? The better your grip is, the worse your trigger pull can be, and you're still going to hit the target, right? The worse your grip is, the more you better be making sure you're pulling the trigger right? So I think it's a scale, but I think out of that scale, the more important aspect is the grip. I think that's more important than the trigger. Okay. So, and I'll give a practical example real quick, and I'll use myself. So these are my two guns that I shoot the most. This is my 19X. This is my P30L. Obviously, very different guns. This 19X is very well broken in. It's got polished internals that I've done. Very, very nice trigger. For a standard Glock trigger, very nice. This P30L is the same, okay? It's polished up internals, but stock springs, stock everything, right? There's no aftermarket parts anywhere in this. Double action, single action, right? Double action pulls about 10 pounds. Single action is like 4.5, 5. But very different triggers. Now, a lot of people have problems shooting double action pistols because of that first long, heavy trigger pull. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect my shooting at all. Why? Because my grip, okay? The grip holds the gun in place no matter what this is doing. My trigger finger can do whatever the hell it wants to. Doesn't really matter. So what kind of counteracts the poor trigger on this gun versus the very easy striker fire trigger on this gun, what counteracts that is the grip of this gun. The grip on this P30L is far, far better than the grip on this Glock. Okay? It is far more ergonomic. It fits my hand like it was made for me, literally. It is so good that that it allows me to get such a good grip that the trigger really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And I've tested this, okay? So shot timers, shooting standard courses, bill drills, and all kinds of things, these guns head to head, I'm actually a little bit better with this gun. And the reason I'm a little bit better with this gun versus the Glock is because the grip of this gun is better. It's more ergonomic, it fits my hand better. So there's less variation in how I grip this gun versus how I grip the Glock, because the Glock just doesn't fit my hand as well. So that consistency enables better shots. My split times with these two guns are exactly the same. I shoot quarter-second splits with both of these. Bill drill times are the same. Accuracy, like I said, a little bit better with this one, but not by a whole lot. So I basically shoot these guns exactly the same, even though they have very, very different triggers. Okay? So that's the skinny on trigger control or trigger pull, trigger press, whatever you want to call it, and some ideas on that. And I know people have different opinions on trigger pulls and how to do things and the importance of it, but really I think that the grip is like the most important thing when it comes to shooting a handgun. I think grip is really probably, I would say grip is about, I'd say 85 to 90% of shooting a handgun. I think 10 to 15% is everything else. Sights and trigger control and all that other stuff. But I think a good 85 to 90% is the grip. If your grip is rock solid and locked in and you index the gun correctly and all that stuff is worked out, you're not over gripping and pulling, you're not doing any kind of weird stuff, and that grip is really solid and locked in, you're 90% there. You're 90% there. The rest of it is getting rid of anticipation of recoil and all that other kind of stuff that goes into shooting. But anyway, so that's just a real quick rundown on trigger, grip, stuff like that. I'll probably cover another video shooting at distance with a handgun versus shooting close up because, like I said, those are different things. But anyway, quick video for today, guys. It's Murphy signing off.